And as the former president of the International Union of Physiological Sciences, you've advocated for interdisciplinary research as well as scientific integrity.
Yes.
So what I've noticed is that with recent funding cuts and political interference, like the suspension of federal grants in the US, what do you think can help scientists maintain autonomy and ensure science serves society and not politics?
I've been responsible for some of the public face of science, both internationally and within my own country, the United Kingdom, for many years. I always look out for ways in which we might be tempted to overhype what we can do. I give an example of that. When the Human Genome Project was first announced as having succeeded in sequencing a human genome, the head of the genome sequencing work in the United States, Francis Collins, predicted that within 10 years, this was just around the year 2000, so by 2010, we would be able to take a cancer patient, read his genome, and then write a report specifying what medication would cure this cancer. Has that happened? No. Will it happen? Sorry to say, no. Now, why is that? It's largely coming back to the problem we discussed earlier on. If you have, let's say, more than 100 genes involved in something like a cancer or cardiovascular disease, you're never going to find just a single gene that will give you the answer. So if you limit genetic engineering to, let's say, a single gene, it's very restricting. What the system will tend to do if you interfere here, there'll be so many possible implications of that within the network of interactions with the products of all the other genes. Just to take one example, it was highlighted in Collins' lecture in the year 2000, or maybe it was 1999. He took schizophrenia as a prime example of what would be sorted by the Human Genome Project. Why? Because it runs in families. It looks as though it is hard inheritance and therefore DNA transmitted. But the reason it runs in families is poverty. Stress is one of the factors that can lead to a disease like schizophrenia. We don't fully understand why, but what we do know is it involves around 300 genes. All of them have got association scores with the condition, but none of them on its own is the cause of what is happening. And this leads me to a very important distinction, which I think scientists are going to have to point out in their interaction with public broadcast, with politicians and so on, which is, first of all, avoid the hype. Promise that everything's going to be solved within 10 years. Scientists love to say that kind of thing in a grant request, telling the grant body, you fund us, we will solve this problem. And it may take us 10 years to do so. But be careful, because often it takes 30, 40 years. For me to understand the robustness of the heart pacemaker, it took me 30 years from building the first pacemaking model to getting to understand the robustness of the complete system. And it's probably not yet complete. I represented science in the UK for, around 20 years during the period in which funding difficulties had happened, rather as is happening in the United States at the moment. And we had to argue very persuasively to a possible future government. That was when the Blair government came in 1997 in the end. And we worked at that for about 10 years. But what we said was impressive to him. You will need, if you come to government and want to restore the scientific base within the United Kingdom, you will need quite a long time to do it. We were not therefore asking him to consider restoring budgets within a year, 2 years, 3 years even, but to take a long-term view, and it's exactly what he did. That government was in power for nearly a decade, and it did precisely what we argued. But we had to be careful not to overhype what we were claiming science could do. And we emphasized many times that it can take 30, 40 years before a scientific discovery becomes applicable in industry or in medicine. So I think we have to just have more caution in the way in which scientists interact, both with the public and particularly with the politicians.